Thanks, Paul. Is the sound okay? You can hear me all right at the back. Um, Four very good talks that hung together very well, very tightly organised on various aspects: the sport, the literary productions, the journalism, so, and the history relating to French. I am giving you something entirely different, okay? But before I do that, I just want to tell you my own little humble claim to fame. I shook the hand of a man who shook the hand of Charles Stewart Parnell. Okay, in Ballygar, 1966, I think it was. My father was lorry delivering gravel. I was the Gosson was being brought along to give his mother a break, and this old fella who had been my father was taking his lunch break in a pub, and this guy was brought up. So I remember it vividly, and he had been a child introduced to Parnell, probably the Craigs by the one of the last that last by-election, that Craig's meeting. So that's apropos of nothing, but it just struck me as I was listening to, I think, Pádraig Travers talking about the parallel, was it the parallel lives there? In any event, to our subject, I'm a historian. I deal in written sources. The problem with dealing with written sources is that the winner's bias gets baked into the sources. Winners literally write the history books. So if you're looking at an event like Aughrim, and Aughrim is a national event, it's a local, it's a battle of huge actual and perceived importance. It's baked into, by way of illustrating it, there are only three contemporary or contemporaneous written accounts from the loser's side of the battle, and indeed of the war: Plunkett, O'Kelly, and Nugent. Two of those were published in the late 19th century, the other just 6-7 years ago. Those three, so that's it. So for most of the historiography of Aughrim and the Williamite War has been I don't want to use the word denominational, an Anglo-centric or Protestant history. It's not. So Irish Catholics dealt with Aughrim by remembering. So I'm looking at history and memory, and I'm not doing the usual thing of debunking, a bit of debunking of memory, but looking at how memory works. We'll begin with local, and I just keep an eye, as usual, I just take off the watch and keep an eye on the time, and no doubt I will be told in due course. So looking at, there's a local memory. So you've got mnemonics, landscape mnemonics in a place like Aughrim. You've got St. Ruth's Bush. It's a furze bush that supposedly marks where St. Ruth was hit by a cannon shot. And it's in the middle, on a hill, Kilcommon, in the middle of the battlefield. I'll explain about the battlefield in just a moment. It's... When was the big frost? Was it 08? There was one of those years. The bush was killed that year anyway. That was the end of it. But I noticed another one has since appeared magically. So you've got St. Ruth's Bush. You've got Bloody Hollow, where Bloody Hollow on the left of your picture, as you're looking at it, is a decided descent on the southern part of the battlefield. I'd better give you an idea of what I'm talking about. I'll just step away here. Aughrim is a very straightforward battle. Two sides facing each other. Each line is running north to south. So you've got the Irish facing, they're lined north to south, facing towards Athlone. That's okay, it's okay. Facing east. Williamites, about 20,000 of them, they're north to south, facing towards Galway, facing west. What's the plan? The plan from the Allied side, from the Williamite side, is to attack all at the same time. So it's something like this, a clash like this, except it doesn't happen like that. It happens that one part, the elbow hits the Irish elbow first, then the wrist, then the hand. The first two phases are check or defeat for the Williamites. The third one is the one that does the trick. Why? Because to counter the earlier incursions, the Irish have taken troops from the northern part of it. It's a simple battle like that. The Irish are on a hill, I'll call it Kilcommodon Hill, in front behind a bog, and they're facing, and the Williamites are coming at them. Now, Bloody Hollow or Glanafulla is another one of these locational icons. In my reconstruction of the battle, it was a place which was static throughout the day, where the Huguenots and the Dutch or the Danish infantry got bogged down and stopped dead, but it wasn't a scene of fierce fighting. The fierce fighting happened on the northern part of the battlefield. So again, the memory is a little bit wrong there. It misses that. It locates things perhaps wrongly. It's got a bigger purpose in mind. Sometimes memory misses rather important things. The most important thing about Aughrim is that it happened 8:30 at night, the Irish were broken. On 12th of July, there was about an hour of daylight left. There's a bog about a mile away. Most of the Irish, in that hour of daylight, managed to get through that hour of daylight and escape to the bog. Where that bog, and by bog I don't mean a turf bog, I mean bogach, an area of soft ground. Where that is helpfully described in the Down survey, Bugga or Bogach. There's no local memory of it, yet that is probably the most crucial terrain feature of all. So local memory is interesting, but I think it's mostly retrospectively retrofitted to what happened. Another pattern is, if you like, a macro memory or national memory. This is a national event. And by way of illustrating the point, the map on your left-hand side as you're looking at it is, I hit a dot represents every officer of captain or above killed or captured at Aughrim. And I use it just by way of illustrating the extent to which there's people there from all over the country. So it's not just a Galway or a Connacht story. And it's a story that's elaborated on. Now, the memory at the national level contains three essential points. One, slaughter. We're told again and again this was an enormous battle. There was slaughter of thousands. Aughrim and Aughrim of the slaughter. That's right from the beginning. That is the trope that is used there. The second one I'll be looking at, the second trope I'll be investigating and questioning, is the idea of the villain and hero, villains and heroes, as a way of explaining outcomes. It's a simplified, easy to understand way, and it's misleading. The third thing I'll be looking at is the idea of the single shot. In the case of Aughrim, it's literally that. A single shot, a shot that supposedly took off Sanruth's head. Everything was going fine till that point. Everything turned. So you got a pivotal, dramatic moment in history, and everything changes after that. And it may be a literal single shot, or it may be, a single explosive event that changes the course of history. So popular history likes to have a story arc with heroes, villains, turning points, and drama. In this case, the drama is a blood-soaked drama. And we look at those critically. Again, this would be a contemporaneous map of Aughrim taken from the Williamite side. You've got a bog in the middle. You've got a hill. They're looking at a hill. It's exaggerated in scale. And it's actually just a very gentle crease on the landscape. And you can see first the time to try to get around the left as you're looking at it of the bog, then up the middle, and they're beaten back. The third time around by the northern flank and passing by the castle on the right hand side as you're looking at it. That did the trick, and eventually the Irish recoil. Now, the question I'm examining first of all is this idea of massive slaughter. McCourtis in Achramanor in a Condi, Tashin a Ganover, Lor Gon Korov, Kebomi Tri Tapi Vian Akis and Lotion, Foga Gon Yaka Gon Farah Gon Torov. There's Achram Anor, Achram of the slaughter. They're left there without, their bones are lying about without uncoffined. Many a quick triatapi, a very quick, lively soldier that was there that day, he's left gone Farah, gone Torov, gone Yaka. No headstone, no wake, gone Farta. I don't know what that's what? Gantorov. So so he's unremembered. Talyasig Kalach not Ganyev no Fui Okalik. This is Akram O'Kelly, the Akram of the O'Kelly. So O'Kelly is, if you like, pseudo anonymous. Not Ganyev not Fuilok Oxidary Tapa Yen Gashka Lapika. Alga Eden Akram and a Srahan Sincha Marvek Fjol Kapel Ag Madrid Australia. They're left in Akram, a Fogu Eden Akram, laid out in rows where they're fighting in ranks. They're lying they're lying dead as they fought, and they're like fjord couple, like horse meat being eaten by the dogs. So it's this very memorable idea of slaughter, almost industrial scale slaughter, and I'm going to investigate that a bit more carefully. And the important things to remember are, first of all, the figures. The idea of the slaughter has apparent historic validity in that the Jacobite army is counted. If you take the infantry of the Jacobite army, there's 17 or 18,000 of them at Athlone. There's 10,000 of them at Limerick. Athlone is the siege before Aughrim, Limerick is the siege after Aughrim. Therefore, 7,000 must have died at Aughrim. N'est-ce pas? Or could something else have happened? And when we look more carefully, what happened with the vast majority, well, many of those, maybe up to 5,000 or 6,000 of those 7,000, is that after Athlone, they went home, particularly the Connacht regiments. The ones that were from Munster, Ulster, Leinster, if they were going to go home, if they were going to desert, they were going to have done so, they would have done so already. But the Connacht regiments grew, as James II said, very thin. So a lot of the loss is not due to Aughrim, but due to desertion. So the figures there are no figures. You cannot believe what any side says about the losses inflicted on the others. That's the bottom line. A key question in trying to figure out how big a slaughter there would have been is this. The Irish break on the Irish are defeated. The northern edge is defeated. And the English or the Allies, the Williamites, come across. They don't, as is often said, overlap them or outflank them, which would have been a catastrophe. Then you're coming down and taking them from the side. They push them back. So if you like, the defeated Aughrim is gradual pushing of the defeated army from ditch to ditch, over the hill, back across. Most of the slaughter, and there is a considerable slaughter, it runs to the thousands, is happening when people are bunging up, trying to cross hedges, ditches, and they're being killed as they try to cross. Then they make it to the next field, and eventually they cross that dead zone of a mile, and it's getting dark. The fact, two things are relative. If you want a really big body count, the winner has to win the battle in the afternoon. A summer's afternoon in a place remote from the nearest. Key question, how far away is the nearest bog? That may seem like an irrelevant question. Why? If you are defeated and you are running, you're running away, first thing you're going to do is throw down your weapon. You're running fast. The infantryman on the winning side is not going to be able to catch you. He's tired. He's not going to outrun you. Who's going to kill you? the enemy cavalry. That's what they're there for. They've been doing nothing else all day except waiting for this chance. So they're going to go like hunting foxes, like we were talking about. Tony was talking about sports there, and this is fox hunting. They're leaping over walls and bushes, and they're chasing down the enemy. How long do they have to run before they get to a bog? If you get to a bog, horses can't get into soft ground. So that therefore the infantry are safe once they can cross into that zone. How close is it to dark when it's too dangerous for horses to run? If it's within an hour or so of dusk and you're fairly close to a bog, most of the army would have escaped and did escape. We know that. So the idea of huge slaughter, I'm going to hazard a guess as to numbers. We know on the Williamite side, it's about 1,000 killed between those killed on the day and those dying of their wounds. And I think you can double or treble that for the Irish. So it's a big event. I'm not downplaying it and its importance, but it's not you'll routinely see people talking about 7,000 killed and one of the biggest battles in Europe. No, it wasn't. I mean, near Wind in 1693, 100,000 on either side. Okay, and it goes on all day, and there's far more. So it's interesting, but it's in a European context, it's second scale. In our context, it's very important. So much for the slaughter, outcome of the slaughter. The single shot. What can we say to that? So the story there. There's a number of different stories that are current. One is that a tobacco peddler named Mullen was bribed, and he came back and he told the Williamites Sanruth would be on a grey horse. Or it could be a shepherd named O'Kelly whose sheep were requisitioned and eaten, and he wouldn't even get the skins back when he asked for them, so he did the same. Or it could be a bishop named, or a man named Trench, who laid the gun that killed Sanruth. And when he was not satisfied, he took off the heel of his boot and he elevated the barrel putting it under the trunnion. Again, they're interesting stories. The fact of the matter is that it's memory needing to put a name. There was no Trench, a gunner in the Williamite army. There was a Trench's a Huguenot family who had been granted lands locally. They were would be a long-established Anglo-Irish family, and one of them was acting as a scout for the Williamites before the battle. So it's necessary to incorporate them into the story to make the national local. Other ways in which the story, and he lost his head literally. I mean, if we try reconstruct, first of all, the gun was fired at a long range. We know the gun, the caliber. It was on the Williamite left wing, and it was firing towards. The distance is about a mile. A gun will fire that far, and a solid metal object coming that has enough velocity to travel that far, if it hits you on the head, it will kill you. It won't knock your head off. I mean, you literally don't, these things don't decapitate somebody. We see Berwick at Phillipsburg being depicted as if that happened. It doesn't happen. But he's hit on the head. But he's hit by a random shot. It can only be a random shot because nobody could possibly aim a gun at a distance of up to a mile away, assuming they had a clear line of sight that far out. So again, memory improves reality. Reality is kind of random. It's a random shot fired maybe at where you think a group of brightly coloured coats are. It's a very, very lucky chance shot. Heroes, and let's not look at, we might get back to that. I want to look at the question of villains. And more particularly, why do we need to be able to hang events on a person? We lost Aughrim because a cavalry commander named Henry Luttrell was on the left-hand northern wing of the Irish army, and when it came to the attack, he wasn't there. He was bribed by the Dutch General Hinckel, and that explains why there was that crucial gap in the northern part of the line. Why does Luttrell fill this role? He fills it because the Irish are broken into two factions at this stage. One faction is that of Richard Talbot, Earl of Tyrconnell. Mount Talbot below is named after a branch of that family who were transplanted to Connacht. On the other side then is Sarsfield, Lord Lucan at this stage, and Sarsfield's great friend is Luttrell. So those who are anti-Sarsfield will blame Luttrell for what happened. Luttrell also gets into a spot of bother, and I don't have time to explain it, but in the subsequent siege of Limerick, he appeared to, or was made to appear to be in backstairs treasonable correspondence with Hinckel. And retrospectively then, he is fixed with blame for what went wrong. Such is the need to find a credible villain, the need to personalise disaster. That comes up, it's come up before in Irish history. If you look at the siege of Clonmel and the siege of Limerick in 1650 and 51, the Edmund Fennell comes up and he fulfills that role. Again, a cavalry commander. So Luttrell is killed on that account. Luttrell stays behind after the siege of Limerick, when everybody else is heading off and taking ship for France. He stays behind. He's awarded a pension by the government. He's given particular roles as a recruiting officer for third-party wars. Ultimately, he is assassinated. He's killed, shot dead, 1717, on his way in what is now Temple Bar, from a night in a coffee house. He's accosted in a sedan chair and he's shot dead. And he's shot by somebody who is carrying a grudge. So when I talk about Luttrell being blamed, it's not a retrospective, it's very quickly retrospectively. There's that poem, the poema written 2 years after the event, blames Luttrell. So it fixes him with blame. But I still think it tells you something about the need for memory to create and craft a story in which there are easily understandable reasons, which mean that if we have another go, this time if there's no traitor, we can do it next time, guys. Nobody is interested in a system of explanation which says, we never had a chance. There are too many of them, too few of us. They've got all the gear. We have nothing. We can never win. That's hopelessness. You have to craft a story that means you can do better next time, and you identify easily fixable faults. So that's the role of memory. Memory is active. Memory has a purpose. History is, well, supposedly more objective. I'm going to conclude by where literally are the bodies buried. And here is one. The bodies were not buried. They were left in the open for weeks and months afterwards. We know that there's an account of the bodies being gradually skeletonized. Ultimately, they are collected under the aegis of the Franciscan monks, the Franciscan friars at Kilconnell Abbey. And they bring the bodies. Now, why is there a friary in Kilconnell? Why is that surviving? You get this in Galway. You get them even well into the penal laws. You get Catholic or crypto-Catholic landowners who take these people under the umbrella of their protection. So at Kilconnell, they create a memento mori, an enormous wall of skulls. It's what are the dimensions? It's quite a big one in an event. 40 foot long, 6 foot high, 2 foot wide, and it seems like it's very much a Mediterranean sensibility. The Capuchin Church in Rome has the vault has that idea of making a spectacle out of bones by way of reminding people, the viewer, that's them now. that'll be you. Next, it's a memento mori sort of it's a different sensibility. It's one that we find a little bit maybe grotesque. That wall was something of a souvenir or a tourist attraction. By the 1830s, it had degenerated into piles of bones. Sensibilities had changed. People were no longer coming to see it, and Lord Dillon of Clonbrock paid some people to gather up the bones and bury them. I have found, I think, along with an archaeologist who did an aerial survey, a drone survey, where the bodies are buried. They're not buried. Traditionally, battlefield burials, well, not traditionally, usually will be in a trench because of the shape of the body. You'll have bodies like, head one way, then somebody has the head that way, because of the nature of the disposal. But in the case of disarticulated bones, it's just a case of shoveling them and you can get a big hole. And working out the dimensions of the hole and the likelihood, after looking at the various passes from these aerial drones, I have on the aerial photograph of Kilconnell Abbey, on the southern side of the range, which is the northern with Abbeys tends to be, and I'm up in the correction here, devoted to domestic stuff, kitchens, privies, the working areas, and the southern is usually where the more sacred space. So we're seeing a definite squarish feature that is even more clear on geophysical. We also did a pass with ground penetrating radar. So we are pretty sure that's where the bodies are buried. However, that's where it has remained for the past 6 years. It's not just COVID. We need a license to dig, to make an exploratory dig. To do that, we need financial backing. It's not going to happen anytime soon. But I just thought I'd leave you. This is not by way of abusing your hospitality to look for money, because it's not something I'm particularly. It's not necessarily a priority. I just think it's an interesting way to round off our story. So to summarise, I'm a historian, and traditionally I used to look on Aughrim and memory and the Shanachas and the folk memory as just old nonsense that you need to sort of get out of the way, deadwood. But really, you should appreciate the role, purpose of memory, of the crafting of stories, as something in its own right. It has its own validity and its own, for want of a better word, truth. So with that, folks, I'm done. Thank you.
Thank you, Padraig. Thanks very much to Padraig Lenihan for another very interesting presentation on a very interesting subject with such a local resonance here in this area. Very interesting, and again, we'd welcome any questions. Jerry.
That the bones which you speak of were collected and they were brought, of course, to the UK or England, whatever you want to call it, and crushed and used as fertilizer. Is there any...
That practice of making bone meal out of battlefield burials, that did happen in the 19th century with a lot of the Napoleonic era battle sites. So it's not an invention at all. It's not invented in that sense, but it didn't happen vis-a-vis Aughrim. It may be that through fear of that happening, that the friars may have organised the collecting of the bones. But we have that definite. A man called Molyneux, 1708, visited Kilconnell. He saw the wall. He counted, or I think miscounted, but a lot of skulls, and that would be where the bodies ended up. There was no. There's also a story going around that they were used for medicinal purposes. That's another one, and that they were. I have no idea what medicinal purpose the skulls or moss growing on skulls would be. But it's a great story. But what you're getting is true of the 19th century.
The 19th century.
Of the 19th century, they used bone meal from battlefield burials or battlefield bodies that are left in the open, and they'd gather them up and use them for that purpose.
And just one other question. During the course of your dissertation, you mentioned Lutterell.
Yes.
Any connection to Lutterellstown Castle, or do you know?
Oh yeah. That's Henry Luttrell of County Dublin, Luttrellstown, County Dublin. So he would be a great friend of Lord Lucan, Sarsfield. Again, just a near neighbour, if you like. Think of Lucan and Luttrellstown. So they're families that are connected back a long way.
It sounds like a Cromwellian name, or a...
No, Luttrell and Luttrell is an old Catholic name.
Old Catholic.
Absolutely. Oh yeah. Oh, he wouldn't like you saying that now.
Okay. Okay. Thanks very much.
In fact, Luttrells, they're an interesting family. Great, they're survivors. They managed to keep their lands under Cromwell by an advantageous. Another day. Okay.
Gentleman here in the third row, Adrian, if you can get the mic up to him.
Throw out a comment. You said about Senator, you're unlikely that it was a random shot that killed him.
Yeah.
Was it on? Okay.
It wasn't a random shot that killed him, is what you asked me.
No, I say it probably was, because was it, and you probably can confirm this, as from reading, I tend to read a bit of history as well, like yourself, but I'm only an amateur. It's that the military in those days had this officer corps in the armies on both sides. They didn't tend to target each other deliberately. It's not like the First World War, where they were shot down as soon as they showed their little heads, the poor lads.
It's a very interesting time of transition. In the old style of warfare, ancient, classical, even medieval warfare, a leader also had to be seen to be up front, leading from the front, getting his hands wet, getting his hands mixing it. By the time I'm looking at it, there's more of a bureaucratic style of warfare, whereby the general stays back from the front.
I'm thinking of the Napoleonic Wars.
But
that was pre that.
No, but even so, it's within the same moral, the same sort of things apply, and it's still relevant. The Ginkel and St. Ruth are not getting stuck in the front fray. But how the generals in those days necessarily, if they do get killed, the way to die like a gentleman is to be hit by an artillery shot. Because you have to reconnoitre the enemy, and if you can see them, they can see you, and they can fire on you with long-range shots. So when I say it's not an aim shot, it's an aim shot. If you can imagine at half a mile, three-quarters of a mile, you would see a group of guys with brightly coloured coats clustering around somebody, and you'd guess that in the middle of that bunch is your general. You fire at that, you're probably going to miss them, but that's what you'd fire at. So it's not somebody looking at the colour of St. Ruth's horse or anything else, but you're firing. And no, they'd have no that you'd aim. That'd be a prize target for a gunner. But maybe that thing of sparing the officers, that sort of officers are more likely to be taken prisoner.
Yeah,
definitely. So in the aftermath of Aughrim, there's a disproportionate number of officers taken. Why? Because the chances are quite good that you as an officer would be known. It's a small country, and in a way what's happening is a civil war.
Yeah.
Protestant against Catholic, but there are people who know each other on either side. So you might spare somebody who's a kinsman, a neighbour, they are related to you, so that if you are known enough and if there's a promise of a ransom, if you're wealthy enough and somebody will give you a ransom money for sparing his life, you'll do it. But if you're some unknown randomer, you won't be spared.
Last, sorry.
Ask him what acreage you covered.
What acreage did the battlefield cover, would you say?
Good question. The battle line extends for 1.5 miles north to south.
Okay.
So that's Kilcommon Hill north to south, 1.5 miles. And then there's about a mile in between the two battle lines, and there's another 1.5 miles. So if you like, the box that tight is 1.5 by 1. But then, if you allow for trying to maneuver around the flanks,
yeah.
you're looking at 2 square miles.
Okay.
That's it, and that's not even accounting for the pursuit afterwards in and north towards Slieveaughty and towards Lochray in that direction.
And Porrick, so interesting. Porrick, will you be having a field trip to Aughrim? Said she.
Said she. I'd be happy to do it if you want to organise it. Yeah, it's very much it's a good battle site because unlike the Boyne, which is completely transformed, the landscape is largely intact, barring the last quarter century. A lot of one-off housing on the Jacobite, but otherwise, so I'd be happy to do it. Ask Kevin to set it up.
And one last bit to put in there. I believe that the O'Kelly clan lost enough of their men at that battle. Did they tend to fight in their own regiments, or was it just that there was a random count came up with the figure? There was supposed to be 500 or 600 of them killed.
You tended to get the recruitment of the regiments. They're recruited by the surviving Gaelic Irish and Old English Catholic aristocracy. So they were the Normans. So you have a lot of Burke regiments. You have Burkes. You have a lot of Flemings, Burkes. In the case of the Galway regiments, you have a Galway City regiment, which is not a clan regiment, but so they are family regiments. And families then the colonel would be, let's say, a butler. If you're from Kilkenny, he'll recruit. His captains will be neighbours, cousins, uncles, younger brothers. So there's very much a family connection. So if one regiment gets into trouble, it's likely to be disproportionate losses from that particular family. Yeah. Absolutely. No, the Williamites buried their own, but they didn't bury. They buried their own on the site at a battle at a place called Fortfield. It's which I've yet to identify, but I mean there are only 2 ring forts or rats, so it's one of those 2. And so they buried their bodies on the site. Some of them they buried as well near. That's the tradition, but I think that they buried them in the churchyard. Right. And some bodies have been found in renovations of the Church of Ireland School in Aughrim. They found bodies underneath the school, which seemed to date to that time as well. I haven't read the archaeological report. So to answer your question, the winners buried their people on site. Right. They didn't bury the losers. That sometimes happens. It's usually you'll bury both sides. It's a very it's just 2 explanations. One is that Ginkle was in a hurry. He really wanted to get to Galway and strike while the iron was hot, but he didn't. Yeah.
No, I was just wondering, was it both parties?
No, it's just one side. So the Irish are in Kilconnell, and the English or the Allies. I have to get out of the habit of saying English. I mean, there were Dutch, there were Danes, there were Huguenots, there were Germans, there were French Huguenots, the North Irish, English, Scots.
They're your allies, right? Yeah. Thank you.
Thanks, Porrick. That was very interesting. How far is Aughrim from here? Is it 20 mile?
It's not. It's not 20 miles.
No, that's what I'm saying. Because the bridge here, the original bridge, we have reinstated it, but you can see the ruins alongside the old one, or alongside the new one. And there's a date on it was blown up just at the start of Aughrim by Sarsfield, apparently, in case that the guy here would breach so on their way, while they were retreating back to Aughrim, they blew up the bridge here I know you've given talks on, there were a couple of battles here on this grounds here itself, like in 1641, the Confederate Army came here against it. But is there any truth in that?
Well, you're right on both counts. I mean, first of all, the 1642, the Connacht Provincial Army, having taken Galway Fort, their next big thing was a guy called John Burke and funded by the citizens of Galway, they besieged Castlecoot here. So Castlecoot was like, well, it was like an abscess. It was really annoying because they had a very effective, aggressive garrison under Richard Coote, I think it was.
Yeah, the son.
But and the O'Connors were laying siege to it very ineffectually, and there was a clash on the Roscommon side, and they were defeated. So your man came along, but they were saved by the bell. A ceasefire happened nationally just when it looked like Castlecoot would be taken. So it remained as, if you like, the southernmost point of English control, a Torn, right down that far. The second question you're asking me about when the Irish are retreating from Athlone, they dig up the fords and they destroy bridges on the Suck. Why? Because Saint Ruth is afraid of an outflanking move. He's moving in a westerly direction. He doesn't want to be outflanked. Yeah. And initially, that was Ginkell's plan. Outflank him. Because if you can imagine...
Oh, no, it makes sense.
It makes sense. You see, where Saint Ruth's, the main Galway-Dublin road in those days was Ballinasloe, Kilconnell, Athenry, Galway. We now think of it as Ballinasloe, Aughrim, Loughrea. So in other words, Saint Ruth is south already of the main line of advance of the Williamites if they're going towards Athlone. He's trying to cover both Limerick and Athlone. But part of it, he doesn't want to be outflanked, so he wants to make it, he wants them to come through Ballinasloe. That's the area, and he wants them to come at him and take him on an Aughrim, and he reckons he can win.
Yeah, that was because they knew the terrain really that way. That person that asked about the Kellys, I'm quite friendly with Brendan Kelly, and he does often say there was a couple of hundred Kellys killed in Aughrim, and if there hadn't been today, the Kellys would be ruling the world. He often lets me know that over a pint. But I'm just surprised that there were only 7,000 killed there. I thought there was more. Maybe it's just legend.
No, there wasn't 7,000. I wouldn't even put it that high. I'd say it was about 1,000 on the Williamite side and maybe 3,000 on the Irish side, 4,000. But if you look at the Interpreter Centre, they'll give your figure. They'll say it's 7,000 plus. And
is that Interpreter Centre still running there? Yeah.
Oh, it is. Yeah. Well, they've got a big pool of money,
and
they're going to do the devil and all now. It's going to be.
Yeah, I was there. And
it's a good setup,
No, it is.
and but it's a very good. It's as a battle site to view. Whoever's showing you around, it's a lovely. It's very much like that, and you need to imagine it. With one thing is the water table was about 3 or 4 foot higher than it is now. So what you look at that, you look at the little hill. It's only a gentle slope, and you've got a kind of a green sward extending for 1.5 miles. It looks like you'd be able to walk across that easily. You would, but in 1691. It'll be wetter. And even then you would have been able to walk across it. But would 10, 20, 30, 40, 100 men, horses, would they walk across it? They'd poach it and turn it into a quagmire. So that's where you have to imaginatively reconstruct the landscape as it was. And it's very hard. Battlefields are funny. You look at them, and if you don't know what you're looking at, you say, "Oh, hum!" It's not very exciting. It needs to be brought alive and explained. And the Interpreter Centre is good like that, and it's worth visiting.